Welcome viewer to the course of web designing. So in this video you will learn that what is CSS, advantages of using CSS, the general structure or syntax of CSS, linking a style sheet to your web page, different selector of CSS, grouping different selectors, and how to mention comments within your CSS file. What is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. Typically, CSS file is a text file with an extension .css and contains a series of commands or rules. These rules tell the HTML how to display. HTML and CSS work together to produce stylish websites, where HTML is used to define the structure of the page and CSS is used to give styles to the elements of the page. Advantages of CSS. CSS saves time. You can write CSS once and then reuse the same in multiple HTML pages. Pages load faster. If you are using CSS, you do not need to write HTML tag attribute every time. Just write one CSS rule for a tag and apply it to all the occurrence of the same tag. So less code means faster download time, easy maintenance. To make a global change, simply change the style and all the elements in all the web pages will be updated automatically. Superior styles. CSS has a much wider array of attributes as compared to HTML. Thus, using CSS, more styles are available for your web pages. Global Web Standard. Instead of HTML attribute, it is being recommended to use CSS for styling. So it's a good idea to start using CSS in all the HTML pages to make them compatible with future browsers. CSS Rule Structure or Syntax. A CSS rule is mainly consists of two parts: a selector and a declaration section. The selector points to the HTML element you want to style, while a declaration section consists of property and its value. The declaration block contains one or more declaration, and each declaration ends with a semicolon. For example, to define a CSS rule, first of all, define a selector and then define the declaration section. That is, define the property and value of each property. So here P, which is a paragraph element, is the selector, where color and text align are the property, and red and center are the value of these properties. So this is the general syntax to define a CSS rule. Linking a style sheet. There are three ways to attach CSS to a page. External style sheet. This method is used to control styling on multiple pages. Each page must include a reference to the external style sheet file inside the linked element.
the link element goes inside the head section. Suppose there is a CSS file and its name is our style.css. To link this file to a web page, then look at this segment of code. And this segment of code, the link element has three attributes. One of them as href attribute, it specifies the location and name of CSS file, while the type attribute is used to specify the type of the file. The third attribute is the relation attribute. It specifies the relation of the CSS file to the HTML document. So this is the way to link external style sheet file to a web page. Internal style sheet. Internal style sheet is used to control styling on one page. Internal styles are defined within the style element inside the head section of an HTML page. Suppose to define the internal style rule for a body section and h1 element. The third type is inline style sheet. Inline styles is used directly with HTML tag. An inline style is used to apply a unique style for a single element. To use inline style, add the style attribute to the relevant element. The style attribute can contain any CSS property and its value. For example, to apply style to p element using inline styles are shown in this segment of code.
CSS Selector. As we mentioned before, the CSS selector points to the HTML element you want to style. We can divide CSS selector into different types, such as the CSS element selector, the ID selector, the class selector, the CSS universal selector. So let's start with the element selector. The CSS element selector. The element selector selects an HTML element based on the name of the element. Suppose we want to apply styling on all paragraph elements. So in this case our selector is P, and we want to set the background color of the all P elements to orange. So in the declaration section, write background color and assign a value of orange, and to set the text color to black, so write color and assign value black. So this rule will apply to all P elements to set the background color to orange and set the text color to black. The CSS ID selector. The ID selector uses the ID attribute to select an HTML element. The ID of an element is unique within a page. So the ID selector is used for styling a unique element. To select an element with a specific ID, write a hash character followed by the ID of the element. As an example, look at this segment of code.
So here the CSS rule will apply to the HTML element with ID last para.
The CSS class selector. The class selector selects HTML element with a specific class attribute. To select element with a specific class, write a dot character followed by the class name. In our example,
the CSS rule
will apply to all HTML elements with class attribute having a value of a center. Suppose there are a number of P and H1 elements with class A center, but you want to center align the text of paragraph elements only, then use the class attribute in the following format. So in this second case,
the CSS rule will apply
only to paragraph element where the class attribute has a value of a center, while this first one will apply to all elements whose class attribute has a value of a center. The CSS Universal Selector. The Universal Selector selects all elements on the page. Look at this example. The above mentioned CSS rule will apply to every HTML element on the page. Now to show you how to group different selectors. So it's also possible to group different selectors together if they have same declaration. So consider the following code. The declaration section for H1, H2 and H3 selector is the same, that is to set the background color to yellow. So you can group these selectors together and write them in the following form. That is, first of all, write the selector separated by comma and then mention the declaration section. We have mentioned different types of selector, but there are also some other types of selector. I will discuss those selectors in the next video. CSS Comments. Comments are used to explain the code and may help when you edit the source code at a later time. CSS comments appear in the following form, that is, slash and asterisk symbols are used to enclose your comments. You can also consider the following example for further explanation. This is a single line comments, but it is also possible to mention the multi-line comments and use the same notation to enclose your multi-line comments. Thanks for watching this video.